A crowded train station, a young mother just trying to make it home, and one police dog who wouldn't let her take another step. What they uncovered beneath the baby sling had officers questioning everything. Here's the full story. But before we get into it, drop a comment with your favorite dog breed, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to stick around. What's coming next is something you won't forget. 6:52 a.m. Union Terminal buzzed with the energy of a typical weekday morning in downtown Cincinnati. The whir of suitcase wheels, the shriek of a distant espresso machine, the low murmur of transit announcements echoing through high-vaulted ceilings, it all blended into that unmistakable soundtrack of urban motion. Officer Grace Ellison sipped her lukewarm coffee and adjusted the black leash looped around her wrist. At the other end sat her canine partner, Titan, a 5-year-old German shepherd bred for discipline, detection, and a level of intuition that had become something of a legend among the transit police. Titan wasn't just a detector dog. He was a sentinel. Grace had seen him alert on everything from counterfeit money sewn into winter coats to a missing child hidden behind a janitor's closet at this very station. But if anyone had asked what made him so effective, Grace would say this: he felt people, not in a mystical way, not magic, just something keen, something refined by exposure to danger, human desperation, and hundreds of hours in high-pressure environments. He watched body language, smelled stress, felt it. Grace had learned to trust that. Routine patrol, her sergeant had said that morning. No alerts on the manifest. But take a few rounds through Platform 9. A late train's pulling in from Chicago, and we've had 2 reports of suspicious loitering around the northern entrance yesterday. No urgency, just routine. But Grace had worked the transit beat for 7 years, and she'd long since learned that the truly dangerous things rarely came with a warning label. They had just finished their second sweep of the Eastern Concourse when Titan's head snapped to the left, eyes fixed on the entrance to Platform 9. No sound, no movement, just an instinctive lock-on. Grace felt the leash tighten, then she saw her. A woman mid-30s, maybe younger, messy ponytail, worn coat zipped over a sleeping baby tucked against her chest in a gray fabric sling. She was pushing toward the boarding area with the urgency of someone late for something important. Nothing remarkable except Titan had moved. Grace didn't command him, didn't cue him, but he'd planted himself directly in front of the woman's path, ears forward, eyes locked, his entire body rigid with purpose. "Ma'am," Grace said, stepping forward with practiced calm, "I'm going to ask you to stop for just a moment." The woman blinked, startled. She rocked slightly on her heels, as if unsure whether to retreat or argue. "My train," she said quickly, voice hushed. I need to get to Toledo, please." Grace nodded, but her eyes were on Titan. He hadn't moved. "This is Titan. He's part of our K9 detection unit. When he reacts like this, we are required to do a quick screening. Nothing to worry about." The woman adjusted the baby sling. I have a newborn. He's sleeping. Please, I understand. This won't take long." Titan remained still, unmoving. He had positioned himself diagonally, nose tilted just inches from the infant's sling, but never aggressive. His breathing slowed, ears twitching with every tiny sound from the sling. Grace felt a cold bloom of tension in her chest. This wasn't a standard alert. This was something else. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Alice," the woman said quickly. "Alice Donnelly. I am just going to Toledo. My mother's there." Grace nodded, but kept her voice even. "And your child's name?" The woman blinked again. "His name's Evan." Grace studied her. She looked exhausted. "Yes, but not unusual. No visible signs of distress, no signs of substance use, no erratic movement. And yet Titan wouldn't move. He was watching the sling like it held the answer to a question no one had asked yet. "Do you mind if I take a look in the sling?" Grace asked gently. Alice recoiled, one hand instinctively going to protect the bundle strapped to her chest. "No, no, please. He just fell asleep. I haven't slept in 3 days. He's been sick and I just need to get home." Grace didn't move closer. She softened her tone. "It's standard. If there's nothing concerning, you'll be on your way in under 2 minutes." But Titan's ears had flattened. His tail stiffened, still not aggressive but braced, like he was anticipating something not right. Alice hesitated. "Can we at least move out of the way? People are staring." She was right. A small cluster of travelers had slowed nearby, watching the scene unfold. Grace stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward a quiet alcove near a coffee kiosk. The woman followed, clearly flustered but still clutching the sling tightly. Grace waited until they were out of earshot before trying again. "I don't want to alarm you, but Titan has been trained to detect a very specific set of substances, not just narcotics, sometimes even items associated with risk or danger. You said your baby was sick. What kind of sick?" Alice's eyes flicked up again. This time there was a flash of something different behind them, not fear, something closer to calculation. "He's just been colicky," she said after a moment. "That's all. But he hasn't been eating right. My mom's a retired nurse. She knows what to do." "I understand," Grace said again, "but I need to confirm that he's okay, and that nothing else is in that sling." Alice stood silent for a moment. Then she slowly began to peel back the fabric of the sling, layer by layer, loosening the wrap that held the child snugly to her chest. The first thing Grace noticed was the heat, an unusual amount of warmth radiating outward as the blanket came free. Then the shape. It wasn't quite right, and then she saw it. Wrapped tightly in the innermost layer of the sling, directly beneath the baby's tiny feet, was a padded envelope. Rectangular, clearly hidden. Grace felt her instincts shift instantly. She raised her hand and clicked her radio twice, signaling for backup. "What is that?" she asked, voice cool now. Alice's face drained of color. "It's nothing, just papers. I swear, I didn't know how else to carry them. In my purse." But Titan had stepped forward now, pressing his nose against the edge of the envelope, inhaling sharply. Then he sat, back rigid, gaze fixed, issuing one short bark. "Official alert." Grace moved quickly, taking the envelope as gently as she could. She didn't need to open it to know it was suspicious. The weight alone was wrong. She passed it to the arriving officer, her words measured. "Scan this. Get it to Lieutenant Banner. I want it on record within 5. Alice was visibly trembling now, her hands hovering protectively near the baby, who was beginning to fuss and squirm. "I swear," she whispered. "I swear I didn't know what it was. I was told it was just supposed to be documents. Something about a custody case." Grace frowned. "Who told you to carry it?" "My ex's friend said it needed to get to someone in Toledo, urgent legal stuff. I didn't think." Her voice cracked. Titan hadn't moved. He sat just inches from the baby, his body still as stone, eyes fixed on the child. Then Grace saw something else. Just beside the sling, barely visible beneath the baby's onesie, a tiny patch of discoloration, purple, bruised. Grace's chest tightened. "Ma'am," she said quietly, "I need to ask you a few more questions, but we're going to do it somewhere more private. The child, your son, he'll be cared for. We'll take this step by step." "I didn't hurt him," Alice whispered. "I didn't. I've done everything I could. He's all I have left." Grace nodded once. "Let's go." As the officers began escorting her toward the security office, Titan stayed close by the child, watching, protecting. And in that moment, Grace knew whatever lay at the heart of this, it wasn't just about the envelope, it wasn't just about hidden contents or drug alerts, it was about the child. And Titan had sensed it from the moment she stepped onto the platform, The walls of the transit security office weren't designed for comfort. Pale beige paint, fluorescent lighting, a ticking wall clock that made time feel slower than it should. Alice Donnelly sat hunched in the molded plastic chair, her arms wrapped tightly around her son, Evan, who had quieted to a restless whimper. Titan lay nearby, his eyes never fully leaving them. His body was relaxed now, but his awareness never dulled. Not here, not now. The envelope had been taken to evidence for screening, and Grace was waiting on results from the lab upstairs. She stood silently behind the two-way mirror, watching the mother and child. Something didn't fit. Everything about the situation rubbed against the edges of logic. The bruising on the infant's leg, the concealed envelope, the story about the ex's friend. Grace had heard enough excuses over the years to distinguish between shaky truth and curated fiction, and this wasn't either. It felt like something else altogether. The baby squirmed in Alice's lap. She rocked him gently, humming a quiet, tuneless rhythm under her breath. Not panicked, not combative, but carrying a tension deep in the shoulders, the kind of weight that didn't stem from guilt, but fear, not of being caught, of something else. A soft knock on the door snapped Grace from her thoughts. Officer Delgado entered with a brown evidence envelope and a pale expression. "We ran the scan," he said, keeping his voice low. Inside were forged court documents, custody paperwork, birth records, medical logs, professionally done, scary good. But there was more. He held out a second bag. Grace looked through the transparent evidence pouch and blinked. Inside was a disposable flip phone, powered off, but with remnants of electrical tape still stuck to the back cover. That wasn't what made her stomach turn. It was the syringe hidden inside the phone's compartment. Empty, clean, but used. With trace elements of something she didn't recognize in the early readout, some kind of tranquilizer, potentially veterinary grade. Someone wanted to sedate the kid, Delgado muttered, or keep him quiet long enough to move him. Grace's fists clenched. "Notify Child Services. I want a pediatric trauma specialist down here, and we need the FBI on this. Now." Delgado gave a low whistle. "You thinking trafficking? I'm thinking this goes deeper than one desperate mother with a forged document." Grace moved into the room. Alice looked up, her arms tightening instinctively around Evan as Grace sat opposite her. Titan rose and padded softly over, settling just to her left, close enough to offer presence without threat. "I need to know everything," Grace said. "No more half-truths. No more filters." Alice hesitated. "I didn't hurt him," she said softly. "I didn't even know what was in the envelope. He's not even mine." Silence settled like a dropped curtain. Grace didn't flinch. "Explain." Alice's eyes brimmed, her jaw tightening as she stared down at the child in her lap. "His name's not Evan, it's Mateo. He's 2 months old. I met his real mother 3 weeks ago at a shelter outside Chicago. Her name was Kira. She'd come from out of state looking for someone to help. She had a black eye and stitches under her hairline. Said her boyfriend was involved in something bad. She was scared he'd sell the baby." Grace stayed quiet, letting the story spill out in waves. She was trying to get out, but she didn't have ID, no cash, and she didn't trust the cops. Said he had people everywhere. She told me she'd rather disappear forever than risk him taking the child. We were only in the shelter for 2 nights together, but we talked for hours. She trusted me, gave me the baby, told me to take him to someone she trusted in Toledo. A woman named Jean Ramirez, midwife, used to work with a domestic abuse network. She said Jean would know what to do. Grace leaned forward, the air feeling suddenly thinner. "And the documents?" "She gave them to me. Said they were just in case. I didn't ask too many questions, just wanted to help." "And the syringe?" Alice shook her head. "I've never seen that before. I swear. Someone must have planted it." Grace studied her. Everything about her tone, her posture was consistent with someone who wasn't playing a part. And still, how do I know you're not just the next link in a chain? Someone using this baby to cover something darker? I don't know what to tell you, Alice whispered. I'm nobody. I work front desk at a motel in the outskirts. I haven't seen my own daughter in 2 years. Lost custody because of a bad relationship and bad decisions. This was my chance to do something right. I thought maybe if I helped one person, it'd mean something. There it was again. Not guilt, redemption. Grace stood, heart heavy. We'll verify everything, but the baby's going to be placed with medical professionals for a full evaluation. No, Alice's voice cracked. Please, he'll panic. He doesn't sleep unless he's being held. I swear I didn't hurt him. I wouldn't. Titan stood as Grace did, his eyes flicking between the two. Then, without command, he moved beside Alice and gently rested his head against her knee. She froze. Then, slowly, carefully reached out and ran her fingers through his fur. Grace took a breath. She didn't need dialogue to understand what just happened. Titan had decided. He believed her. 2 hours later, the pieces began falling into place. Jean Ramirez was real, a retired doula and safe house coordinator who'd moved to Toledo 3 years ago after her own facility was burned down in a suspected arson attack. The Chicago shelter had confirmed Kira's presence briefly, but she'd vanished shortly after giving a false name at check-in. The forged documents, high quality, too high for someone like Alice to source alone. And the phone, registered to a burner address in Minneapolis, probably dead end. But the chemical compound in the syringe told a darker story. Etorphine, an ultra-potent veterinary sedative used primarily for large wildlife, rhinos, elephants. Just a fraction of a drop could cause respiratory failure in a human infant. This wasn't an accident. It was an attempt to transport the child, or silence him, permanently. By late afternoon, the FBI confirmed suspicions of an interstate trafficking operation involving forced surrogates, black market adoptions, and falsified medical networks. Several names tied to cases across Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana had surfaced in previous investigations, but none ever stuck. Until now. Until Titan blocked a mother at the edge of a train platform. Back at the station, Grace found Alice in the quiet waiting room, cradling the now sleeping Mateo in her arms. Titan lay at her feet, tail softly thumping the linoleum floor with slow, steady beats. He's safe for now, Grace said, sitting beside her. Medical reports show no long-term injury. Jean has agreed to take temporary custody while the FBI sorts out the legal side. Alice looked up slowly, fatigue painted into every line of her face. What happens to me? You'll have to speak with the Bureau, but between you and me? Grace exhaled. You might have just blown open a network we've been chasing for 3 years. Silence again. Then Alice looked down at the baby's tiny face. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want another kid growing up terrified like mine did. That's all. Grace nodded, and after a long pause, she stood. As she turned to leave, Alice spoke again. Titan. He knew, didn't he? Not just about the envelope, about the baby. Grace smiled. He always knows. Titan lifted his head at the sound of his name, and with the calm of a soldier at rest, returned to his silent watch, ever present, ever aware. 2 days had passed since the events at Union Terminal, but the ripple effects were just beginning. The baby, Mateo, was safely recovering in a pediatric trauma ward in Toledo. Jean Ramirez, calm and composed, had taken immediate custody, her quiet authority and decades of midwifery experience calming even the most anxious hospital staff. No sign of drug exposure. The bruises were shallow, more likely the result of improper handling than intentional harm. But what haunted Grace most wasn't what had been found. It was what had almost slipped through unnoticed. She'd reviewed the body cam footage 3 times already, Titan's reaction. The envelope, the hidden syringe, and Alice. She hadn't run, hadn't lied, at least not with malice. And even when faced with suspicion and flashing badges, she'd held onto that baby like something sacred. Grace was still writing up her report when the phone buzzed. It was a number flagged from the FBI's field office in Chicago. Agent Sims spoke with a clipped voice, facts first, emotion later. A small raid had been executed that morning based on details provided by Alice and background traces on the envelope. 2 arrests, 1 woman, Kira, identified in a room in poor condition, traumatized, dehydrated but alive, and confirming everything. She'd given Mateo away to save him. They were threatening to take him to another country, Sims said. Said he was worth more overseas. She panicked. The boyfriend was using her to smuggle children under assumed custody. Alice was her way out. And the boyfriend? Grace asked. Gone. But we've got names now. Trails. And your canine unit gave us a story too powerful to ignore. That's not something we get often. Grace hung up and stared at the report half-finished on her screen. Words swam before her eyes. Attempted trafficking. Falsified legal custody. Scheduled international movement within 7 days. The baby had been hours away from vanishing, and Titan had stopped it with a look, with a pause, with one stubborn refusal to step aside. Alice sat in the small government building in downtown Cincinnati, hands folded in her lap, facing the kind of 2-person review panel that made even innocent people sweat. Her public defender had prepped her for the worst: child endangerment, unauthorized transport, obstruction. But none of that came. Instead, the woman across the table offered a tired smile. You're not being charged. You'll be listed as a material witness, and we'll arrange for temporary shelter while we work with the Bureau to determine the next steps. Alice blinked. I can stay? For now, the woman said. But the bigger question is, what do you want to do next? Alice hadn't thought that far. She was used to temporary beds and paper coffee cups and nights that ended in borrowed sweatshirts and borrowed names. But this time, she wanted something more. I want to work, she said. I want to prove I'm worth something. The woman nodded. We've got contacts, shelter programs, legal assistance, and your testimony could mean a lot for Kira's case too. Alice swallowed. She trusted me, and I almost lost him, but you didn't. That night, Alice sat alone in the shelter's garden courtyard, sipping tea someone had left by her door. She stared up at the sky, not looking for answers, just breathing. The door creaked behind her. She turned. It was Grace, and beside her, leash loose but posture proud, stood Titan. I figured you might want company, Grace said. Alice didn't speak, just nodded. Titan patted forward and gently nudged her knee. Then, without command, he sat beside her. For a moment, no one spoke. Then, Grace handed her a manila folder. It's a petition from Jean Ramirez. She's filed for emergency guardianship of Mateo. But she's adding a clause, one that allows monitored visitation. Alice looked down at the document. Her name was handwritten in the margin beside Mateo's. Jean said the boy responded to your voice better than any nurse in the hospital, Grace said. She thinks he remembers, trusts you. Alice closed her eyes. After everything, after trains and syringes and accusations, he still trusted her. Grace sat beside her on the bench, letting the night settle around them. I used to be in your shoes, you know, she said quietly. Not the same story, but the same weight. The same feeling like you're not allowed to start over. Alice looked at her. Addiction? Grace nodded. Fentanyl. Then oxy. Pills led to stealing. Stealing led to jail. Jail led to a second chance. Took me a long time to believe I deserved it. And now you're a cop? Grace smiled. Now I'm human. And sometimes that's enough. Titan shifted slightly, his head resting near Alice's hand. She let her fingers run across his fur. I called him a mutt, she whispered. He's been called worse, Grace said. But he still sat beside you when you cried. That's the thing about dogs. They don't judge your past, just your energy. Alice smiled, faint and tired. Is he always like this? Grace shook her head. No, he's usually colder, more distant. But something about that baby, something about you. He saw it. Alice looked up again. What did he see? Someone who wouldn't run, even when it would have been easier. 1 week later, Grace and Titan stood quietly at Union Terminal again. The crowd bustled around them as usual. Announcements pinged, coffee machines hissed. But Grace wasn't watching the people. She was watching the doorway. Then there she was, Alice, clean clothes, hair pulled back, holding a small carrier with Mateo nestled inside, sucking on his fingers. Jean walked beside them, protective but relaxed. Alice caught sight of Titan first. She smiled. Hey, hero, she said softly. Titan's ears perked, tail wagged once. Jean turned to Grace. We've got a long road ahead. Therapy, custody reviews. But she's showing up, every day. Grace nodded. That's all any of us can do. As they turned to leave, Alice paused and looked back. I meant what I said, Officer Ellison. If he ever needs a retired partner to hang out with in a sunny backyard one day, I've got a patch of grass waiting. Grace smiled. I'll let him know. As the trio disappeared into the crowd, Titan looked up at Grace, then back at the space where they'd been. She leaned down and scratched behind his ear. You did good, she whispered. You didn't just find danger, you found something worth saving. Titan stood tall again, ready to patrol. But this time his steps were a little softer, because sometimes the greatest alerts weren't about what was hidden. They were about what could be saved. If you like this story even a little, just wait till you see what's coming next. We've got more real, emotional stories where animals change lives, and trust me, you don't want to miss them. So hit that like button, tap subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.